Hello and welcome to another instalment of Antique Antics. I think one of the most common questions that I get asked is, how do you get into the world of art and antiques? And this can be from young and old alike, and there are many different ways you can do it, but there are pitfalls involved if you try to jump in feet first. So we'll just talk through a few ways you can do it. We'll talk through how I got into it, how I've seen other people get into it, and indeed how I've seen people fall by the wayside when they thought it was easy. So we'll start with the obvious way, and this can be, as I say, for young and old alike. If I'm asked by the parents of a 15-year-old lad or a 15-year-old girl saying my child is really interested in antiques and would like to give it a go in the auction world perhaps, how can they get a bit of experience? Well, the obvious way is to go along to your local auction room and see if there are any openings for help out on view days and sale days. Now obviously right in the middle of this COVID business that's not going to work, because auction rooms aren't having view days as we know them, and certainly not having sale days as we know them, with all sales being online. So we're looking at what you could do, or what they could do, once this pandemic is sorted out somewhat, which will be some time yet, I appreciate. So you go along to your local auction room and you say, I'm really interested in antiques, I'm really interested in art. Is there any chance I could come along and help out on your view days or view evenings? You might be put behind a cabinet. You might be asked you might even be asked to wear a white coat and walk around the sale room. But you can observe, you can soak it up, it's almost like a sponge when you get into a situation like this, where you're surrounded by people that know about antiques and art to greater or lesser degrees. You can soak it all up and never be afraid to ask people in the trade what it is they see in that piece or whatever, because I can tell you from experience, most of them are happy to share their knowledge and wisdom. They like young people asking them about it. Now the same applies, of course, here. If you were a middle-aged person who'd taken early retirement, or indeed a retired person, you could go along and ask that. I often get asked by middle-aged housewives or middle-aged house husbands. You know, I'm fascinated by antiques programs on telly. I'd love to work in an auction room. How can I get in? Well, the same applies. You go along, you ask, are there any openings to work in the evenings or work during the day, and you'll love it. It's absolutely lovely. The auction room I worked in for over 40 years, some of the part-timers we had over the years, there were some real characters, and they absolutely loved it. It becomes almost like a family atmosphere. So I guarantee that you would really enjoy it. So it's worth trying once all the COVID thing is over with. If you're that keen on it, young or old, go along and speak to your local auction room. You never know, there may be an opening. Now, the other way you can get into the antiques trade, of course, is to become a dealer to a lesser or greater degree. Now, if you're purely interested in antiques through watching it on TV, it's going to be very low key, isn't it? It's going to be buying something and then putting it on eBay and maybe doubling your money up. If you spent £5 on something, getting £10 or so on and so forth. But I think what a lot of people think, they go along to an auction and they see the dealers there and they see them pay X amount of money for it, and they think, oh, this is an easy life. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. It can take a lifetime for a dealer to build up a client list where he knows that if he buys something for £200, £300, £400, £500, invariably the way dealers work today, they've often got a buyer for it already at maybe a small profit, maybe a larger profit. You don't see many genuine antique shops around these days. So the genuine bigger dealers, they already have a buyer for a lot of these things. So it's not as easy as you think. Yep, there's the low key, buy for £10, sell on eBay for £20. But often when people ask me about this, how do I become an antique dealer, they're talking about making a living. Now, if it were that easy, when I moved from the West Country up here to Norfolk and decided to start my own business as a valuer for probate, insurance, etc., if it were that easy to become an antique dealer, then I would have done that. Of course I would have done that. With the knowledge I have, the knowledge I've accrued over the years, I would be able to do it. The problem is, it's breaking in to what is often a closed shop of dealers. Now, as I say, if you're working at that very low level, it's quite easy to do. It's not a problem at all, but that's not making your living. And believe you me, it can take many, many years for you to be accepted into, let's say here in Norfolk, for instance, for you to be, if you wanted to be a silver dealer, for you to suddenly turn up at an auction buying silver willy-nilly, and all the silver dealers from the area are looking at you going, well, who's that? We have no idea who that is. You could be eaten for breakfast. So don't go in too high. I can give you a brief example here of where I used to live in the West Country, and this is going back to the 1980s. There was a chap who had taken redundancy, and he had quite a big redundancy payout, and we knew him at the auction room just through being a casual viewer that would often buy the odd bid as a private individual. He took redundancy, had a nice big payout, and so he thought to himself, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become an antique dealer. This was in the days of Lovejoy. That you had the Antiques Roadshow on TV, and the only other antiques program was Lovejoy. And believe me, a lot of the stories on Lovejoy happened. That's not fanciful. Back in the day, there were a lot of villains about. There were a lot of people. It was a dog-eat-dog world. So anyway, this chap, who I guess was probably late 40s, something like that, he decided to become an antique dealer. So what did he do? He didn't say to himself, I'm going to start low-key, I'm going to start coming along to the auction and buying small items, getting myself known, talking to other dealers, learning the ropes, if you like, to be an antique dealer. He didn't do that. He went to the main shopping road in the seaside town that I lived at, and this was quite a smart road with smart shops, and remains so to this day. And he took a lease out on probably one of the 3 biggest shops on the road, a big corner plot. And he went out and spent all his redundancy money on stock and filled the shop up. I never forget the first day he turned up at the auction. He came in, he had completely remodelled himself just from being an average Joe. He suddenly had a tweed jacket, a check country shirt, a cravat, glasses on a cord around his neck. And he sat in the front row with his notebook, like he had seen other dealers do, and played at being an antique dealer. The thing was, none of the other dealers liked this, because they saw somebody coming in and stepping on their toes without even introducing themselves. So they let him buy all the dodgy stock. They bought all the good things. He'd not learnt enough, so he ended up spending all his redundancy money, filling his shop up with decidedly dodgy goods. And when I say dodgy, I mean he thought he was buying quality antiques where he can make a big profit on. He didn't. He filled his shop up with things that had a fault here or there, things that had a handle missing, paintings that looked the part but really weren't the part, and so on and so forth. What happened? After 6 months, he was gone. And I think I recall, probably in the time that he was there, I don't think I ever saw more than half a dozen people in the shop. So there's the lesson to be learned. Don't aim too high. Start at the bottom, go to your local auction room, speak to dealers, get yourself known, and then you will be accepted. Now sure, today it's not quite the same as it was in those days of the late 70s and 80s, where, as I've said, Lovejoy those plot lines, those storylines are oh so familiar to me, looking back to those days. A lot of villains, a lot of very good people, but very cutthroat as a business. So there we go. There's the two ways you can get into the antiques trade, young or old. You go along to your local auction room, you speak to them. They hopefully will allow you to come along and work in the evenings behind a cabinet or out on the floor. Speak to people in the trade. Learn things. The thing is, you don't become an expert overnight. I look at myself, people call me an expert. I'm not an expert. An expert is somebody that knows about one thing. So you'll get experts on Chinese porcelain. You'll get experts on antiquarian books. You'll get experts on Persian rugs. You can't get an antique expert on everything, regardless of what they tell you on some of these TV programmes. It honestly makes my blood boil when I see them being called experts, our experts today. And it probably embarrasses them a little too, because we're not experts. We have a very, very good all-round knowledge about antiques in general. We know what an 18th century Worcester jug looks like. We know what a early 20th century third edition of a famous book is worth. We know lots of things, but we are not experts. I get called an expert in the local paper that I write for. I have to put up with it. I guess the public like looking at me as an expert. But there we go. It'll take you many, many, many years before people start calling you an expert. And even when they do, it's a little bit embarrassing. But there we go. Until the next time, bye-bye.